he had me visualize, and I wrestled with this. I really wrestled with this. Every single baby, and I thought it was a ridiculous thing at the time, but I think it was so important. Every single baby that I killed, and he really made it so graphic, but I think that's how we need to look at it to really understand how ugly, because every human life is worth something in God's eyes. And until we see it in those terms, we don't really realize how offended God is when we kill just one. Just one. That's how valuable one child is to the Lord. One.
Dr. Johnson, I've been looking forward to this conversation. Thank you for coming all the way out from Texas.
So have I. I've heard so much about you, and I almost feel as though I want to interview you.
We'll take turns.
You have done
We'll go one at a
so
time.
much for someone so young.
Well, thank you. It's been a work of a lot of people working together, and because of you and many others, I feel like we've made so much progress in our movement. So I'm excited to hear your story and go through it. So you're a doctor and also a wife, a mother, and a grandmother. Any other titles?
No, just a child of God.
That's the best title. And so tell me first why you got into medicine in the first place, and what made you interested in it?
Well, it started with dissecting frogs. And just...
You liked dissecting frogs.
Yes, I guess my hands were always meant to be a surgeon. And I love dissecting animals, and it led from biology class into the operating room.
And what was that trajectory like? So you're a kid. Did you dream of being a doctor when you were little?
I actually wanted to be a chemical engineer, and but along the way I got interested in medicine. I followed in my brother's footsteps. He was a family practitioner, and actually when I changed from my desire to be a chemical engineer to be a physician, I followed him to Washington, D.C., went to Harvard University Medical School, and got sick and tired of being cold in Washington, D.C., and ended up in Los Angeles in residency, and met my husband there.
So when you get to Los Angeles and you're doing residency, what were you starting? Were you doing a rotation? How did you end up doing an abortion? Or what was your experience with your first abortion, whether you witnessed it or you were being told to practice it as part of residency?
Well, we were given the option to perform abortions if we wanted to. And there was one of the residents in our program who vehemently said, "I will not go into that room and kill those babies." One person stood up and said, "You all can go in and kill those babies, but I won't." And we thought she was unusual because everybody else just followed along with the rest of the group and went in and watched that first abortion. But she didn't. And so once you get on that trajectory of seeing the first abortion, that process begins of becoming desensitized to the humanity of the human child.
What was going through your mind when you walked into that room? I mean, this woman had just said, this other a resident had just said, I'm not going to go in there and watch them kill babies. And then you go in there with these other residents. And what was going through your mind?
I grew up in Trinidad, and abortion was not legal in Trinidad. I knew the Lord back then, but once I got to the United States, I backslid. And I think when you fall away from the Lord, it's difficult to really regain that sense of value. I think it didn't even dawn on me that I was on a path of destruction at that point in time. So my conscience wasn't even pricked to think that I was actually entering a path of further degradation of my soul.
What did you see? Did you actually, was it first, second trimester, that first abortion?
No,
What did you see?
initially you see a first trimester abortion. So it's very insidious. So you're not introduced to the, late-term abortions when you first introduce the abortion. So you're introduced to the suction D&C. So that's where, you get the initiation of the little blob of tissue, that commonly, the patients who come into the abortion clinic are made to believe that the baby is a blob of tissue. So you don't see it as a human being, because by the time it comes into the bottle, that's all you see, little fragments.
And when you were the resident in that operating room, did you even see the bottle or the fragments, or you were just focused on the doctor and?
Yeah. So you see little fragments in the bottle, but it doesn't mean much at that point in time. So that's why you can go back the second time. So you're gradually introduced to abortion that way. So it doesn't feel so bad. So you're enticed to go back the second time.
And at what point did you then, in your career, start doing from residency and witnessing abortion, actually doing abortions yourself?
So the way it works, you go back in, the second time, and you put on a schedule to do, abortions, which is a weekly thing, and then you get good at it. So then you get to do the more advanced ones, and then by the time you get into your second year of residency, you learn that you can do this for money. So that's how you get into the moonlighting scene. And
what is that, the moonlighting scene?
Moonlighting is when you can be offered to go into the clinics in the community.
And what kind of money are we talking about?
Well, back in those days, when I was a resident, and we're talking about over 40 years ago, back then an abortion paid, as a resident, if I'm remembering correctly, I was being paid about $50 to do an abortion.
And that's probably several
That's my
hundred
take
today.
home. Oh, yes, that was my take home back then. And I could go in and perform, probably about 10 to 15 abortions on a moonlighting day during the week. During the week, probably I can do about 10 or 15 a day, on a weekday. On a weekend, I could probably do about 30 on a Saturday.
And this was all as a resident? Or
As a resident.
And so what
starting.
what brought from you, I mean, as a resident, I know it's nice to have extra money, so that was
Oh,
extra
yes.
income for you. And then
Yes.
at what point did you get into your own practice, and did you continue to do abortions?
Well, that went on from my second year residency through my fourth year of residency. I was doing that on the side. And so by the time I met Haywood, of course, it became more profitable because there were two of us. And by then, you know, I introduced him to the business of abortion, and we can double the money. So, you know, I helped to hone his skills because he learned to do the DNC procedure. So from second through fourth year of medical school, it was a profitable business for a resident to augment the salary.
How many abortions do you think you've done in your career?
Well over 1,000, I would say.
And how many, would you have a sense of how many were the first trimester versus the later term, second or third trimester abortions?
Well, back in my day, the later term ones were done in the hospital setting. And back then, they were prostaglandin abortions or saline abortions in the hospital setting. Now, when we were moonlighting at the clinics, occasionally we would get second trimester abortions for patients who would come in pretending that they were first trimester, who didn't want to pay the bigger price for a second trimester. You think you were performing a suction curettage, which is where you know, inserting a suction cannula attached to the machine that suctions and aspirates the fluid, and the baby has small parts that typically will come through the suction device into the bottle. But now you have more solid limbs and possibly skull that won't come through the cannula into the bottle. So you have now to use stronger instruments to reach into the uterus to pull out bony fragments that you didn't bargain for. So now you have fetal parts that you have to extract and reassemble and put back together.
When you were doing this, was there ever a moment, you mentioned your conscience earlier was like, it felt numb or it wasn't pricked. Was there ever a moment, I mean, this is a living child, a living fetus, was there ever a moment when you were doing these abortions that you saw the humanity, or there was any sense in your heart, maybe this is wrong? Did you ever question what you were doing?
You know, I guess you get to the point where your conscience gets so seared that you rationalize that you're doing good in order that you can keep on doing this thing. So the doctor herself becomes dehumanized, completely desensitized, dehumanized. So in order to continue doing this, you never make eye contact with your patient. So the patient is sitting in front of you, and you really don't identify with her as a human being.
Why is that?
Because if you look at her, you can identify with her pain and her suffering, and you see her as a human being.
But you when you say her pain and suffering, you mean you sense that she's suffering because she's having the abortion.
Yes.
That she knows this is a
Yes,
child and that
because
she's
no
uncomfortable.
woman wants to hurt her baby. No woman really wants to give up her child. A woman going in for an abortion has already identified with her baby.
So you and your husband Haywood were doing abortions together. You had trained him or helped initiate him into how to do abortions, and you were doing them together. Was there ever a point where you discussed together the morality of abortion or any discomfort you had? Was that ever a topic of conversation?
No, we never talked about it. No, that never even crossed our mind. We just, I guess it just happened. We just saw it as something profitable.
And then what was the moment that changed your mind on abortion?
I guess we moved to Texas. And Texas was Bible Belt, Texas. We were coming from Los Angeles. So we moved to town, and as we, doctors traditionally do, coming to a small town, we go to the elders of the town in the professional field. And so I visited one of the elder OB-GYNs in town to introduce myself to him. And one of the questions he asked, and I guess knowing that we were coming from Los Angeles, he asked Dr. Johnson, "Are you planning on doing abortions?" And I said, "Oh, yes, there's nobody providing that service in town." And he said to me, "Oh?" He said, "If I were you, I'd tread very cautiously on those grounds. You don't want to be known as the town abortionist." So I took it as his advice, and I said, "Oh, okay." So we moved to town, and I thought it was good advice, and nobody was providing the service. So I continued doing abortions in town, in Bryan College Station, on the down low. So I did a few abortions to patients whom I thought I could trust with my secret. But sooner than later, the word got out. And one day, a patient openly showed up at the office and asked to have an abortion. And I said, "Who told you that I did abortions?" And she said, "Oh, family practice doctor so-and-so down the street told me to come to you for an abortion." I was taken by surprise because I didn't know that the other doctors in town knew that I was performing abortions. And so at that point in time, I quit doing abortions.
But you were, I want to understand this. You felt fine with it in Los Angeles.
Yes.
You said you didn't even have a moment of conscience. You didn't discuss it with your husband, who was also a physician doing abortions. Mm-hmm. And now you're in Texas, and people are, it seems like there's more of a sensitivity around it. And now you don't even want anyone to know that you do them. Why do you think that was? What was going on there?
Well, see, I wanted to guard my reputation. And so I was not pro-life. I was okay with killing babies. So I didn't have a change of heart. There was no moral conviction.
When did the moral conviction happen?
So it was only until the Lord touched my husband's heart and changed him that it reignited something in me. And I remembered my conversion when I was a little girl back in Trinidad. I remembered my salvation experience of when Jesus touched me. And it brought the whole picture back together of where Jesus touched my heart. And it brought back the humanity to me. And then I saw the babies for who they were, as part of God's creation.
Was that a gradual process? I mean, you were practicing abortion, you're in Texas, and then, you have this awakening spiritually, this re-encounter in your faith. And then was there this, this moment where you said, oh, now I'm against abortion? I mean, what was that? And what did you think about the past abortions? Was that difficult for you to wrestle with, those 1,000 abortions?
No, it was like night, and it was a Saul Paul thing. Just like when my husband got saved, for him, and I let him relate his story. But for me, when I saw his conversion, it was like snap. I remembered my conversion as a little girl. And right then, it was like if the Lord said, you did abortions. You killed my babies. It was like if he awakened me right away. And I saw what was going on with Haywood. And the first thing I said to him, oh my God, we killed babies. We need to go repent of the Lord for what we did. It was like immediately I saw what I did. It was a wake-up call. But interestingly, even when I woke up, it was like if it was a bad dream. Even after I woke up and I recognized what I had done, the rehumanization was still a process.
Tell me about that. What do you mean by that?
So, a lot of people had to help us with that process. One of the first people that helped us through the process was Dr. Philip Ney. I don't know how Philip found out about us, but he reached out to us. He's a Canadian psychiatrist, psychotherapist, who reached out to us and invited us to join him to several meetings for former abortion providers. And we traveled with Philip to Canada and to several Eastern European countries, where, along with other former abortion providers, he took us through a healing process.
This was with you and Haywood together?
Yes, sometimes we were together, sometimes we were alone, individually. But he took us through this process of rehumanization, where he helped us recognize what had happened to us. And he helped us to understand that something had happened to us along the way, that we could get to the point where we could kill another human being.
Tell me more about that, because I've talked to abortionists, former abortionists, and religious conversion wasn't part of it. For some, that would come later or that would precede, but there are so many different stories. And for some, there is a strong religious conversion, but for others, there's a moment of humanity where they see the child as a child instead of just flesh. And so I'm curious your thoughts on that, because for you, I know there's a lot of it was a religious conviction that was reawakened in you, an encounter with Jesus, as you say. But what did you learn as you were studying even desensitization and working with this other doctor?
One of the things that I experienced was that I think was useful in my particular case was he had me visualize, and I think it was really good for me. He had me visualize and I wrestled with this. I really wrestled with this. Every single baby, and I thought it was a ridiculous thing at the time, but I think it was so important. Every single baby that I killed, and he really made it so graphic, but I think that's how we need to look at it to really understand how ugly, because every human life is worth something in God's eyes. And until we see it in those terms, we don't really realize how offended God is when we kill just one. Just one. That's how valuable one child is to the Lord. One.
How long did that process take to go through all those abortions and visualize each of those children?
He had me try to name everyone, bury everyone. And it was painful. Painful. The most painful thing, this was painful. And this was something that I really had to dig up, because this really got so close to home. One of those babies that I had to dig up and bury and name was my sister's baby that I aborted.
Did you talk to your sister about that?
Yes.
How did that go?
Of course, I had to ask her forgiveness. And she said, yes, talk about it. Tell the world. People need to know how ugly this thing is. Because now I have no children. The only child I gave birth to is now dead. She had one other child who lost his life at 42 years of age in a tragic boating accident. And I aborted the other child that she had.
Is there anything you want to say if someone is listening who's a medical student, who is a doctor themselves, or they know students are doctors, about that process of dehumanization, as you say, desensitization? What would you say to others? Maybe they don't see abortion as you're describing it. They don't see it as a child, as a baby, as a life. What would you say to them?
Do not go into that room.
What do you mean?
Do not even accept an offer to even witness an abortion. Do as my fellow students said. No, thank you. I will not witness an abortion.
There are students that contact us and say they're being asked to go to abortion trainings as part of they're trying to make it a typical part of rotation. No. And they have the right to say no.
They have the right to refuse. No one can make you do that. You have the conscience right to refuse. No, I will not enter that room. Under no circumstance will I do it. Period.
Because if they do it, you think that begins...
It begins an insidious process of destruction of your soul.
I've noticed that is a very mainstream push now. They're trying to make abortion very commonplace in the medical profession. They're trying to get a lot of younger doctors involved in it. A couple decades ago, they would complain that the abortion population was graying. There weren't enough abortionists who were younger. And now I hear reports from medical students that it's being included as part of their training. What would you say to that?
No. It's the number of abortions, of course, has gone down. The American College of Graduate Medical Education has been trying to do that unsuccessfully, so they were trying to make residency programs hinge accreditation based on that, but that has not been successful.
The more voices like yours that speak out, the less successful they will be too.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So that the push for that has not been successful. So we are winning.
Yeah.
We are winning. And we will see, with God's help, we will see the reversal of Roe v. Wade.
Well, I look forward to talking to you about that and your ministry with your husband, but this is wonderful. Thank you. Dr. Haywood Robinson, thank you for coming on and sharing about your life. You've got such a fascinating life and you're doing amazing work, so I'm excited to dive into it.
Yes, it's a blessing to be here, Lila, a superstar in our movement. It's wonderful to see what the Lord has done in your life since you were a teenager. And now you're a veteran. And
Not a teen anymore.
But the wonderful years, what you've been spared from, that so many people have gone through. So it's my pleasure to be here, and I know I've really made it now. Now that I've made it with an interview with you.
Well, I was talking to your beautiful wife earlier, and she was saying she was going to interview me. So I said, okay, let's take turns and do that today. But
Yes.
you're a doctor, husband, father, grandfather, a lot of different things. But tell me first the doctor part. When you were a kid, did you think you were going to grow up to be a doctor?
Yes, ma'am. I don't know when that seed was planted in my heart, but since I was about 4 or 5 years old, I knew I was going to be a doctor. I wanted to be a doctor. I had no educated relatives, no nurses, no doctors, no attorneys, but I held on to that calling, and I was blessed to be smart enough to make it through the sciences and make it through college and university, but never wanted to do anything else except to be a physician. And so what I know in my heart, these hands were made to heal and to comfort people. And after practicing almost 40 years of family medicine, retrospectively, I know that calling was true, and it's a blessing that I was able to enjoy family medicine along with my wife as an obstetrician gynecologist for so many decades.
So you grew up, tell me where you grew up and then how you ended up landing in medical school, because that's no easy feat, and getting through it is also no easy feat. But tell me about that upbringing and where you landed, how you landed in medical school.
Well, brought up in South Central Los Angeles, inner city
Nice.
Los Angeles. I would say lower socioeconomic background, but that doesn't make a difference whether you're privileged or lower socioeconomic. What I've found and shared with young people is that when the Lord gives you a vision, and that's His vision, that He will also give the provision. So it doesn't matter if you don't have money. He's going to find the way for you to get the resource to go through school. Now, you're still going to have to study. You're still going to have to take those tests. You're still going to have to take those board exams, but He is going to find a way and put other people in your path to help you. So I made it through high school.
And were you raised a Christian? Or is that part of your upbringing? Or?
That's another really good question. I was raised going to church. I attended a church along with my mother and my twin brother every Sunday, but I was just a church attendee. And what I remind people, and that is by just attending church, that does not make you a Christian, no more so that sleeping in the garage makes you a car. You have to have the Spirit of the Lord. You have to have a conversion experience and experience the salvation of the Lord Jesus Christ to become a Christian. And unfortunately, a lot of people attend church week after week after week and never are spiritually changed. And that's a very unfortunate thing.
So when you got to medical school, your eye was on the prize. I'm going to be a doctor. You have your twin brother, your mom. You're raised in Los Angeles. Where did you go to medical school? And then tell me the moment you met your wife, because that happened in medical school, I know.
Well, I'll back up a little bit. Thomas Jefferson High School, South Central LA, on to the California Institute of Technology in Pasadena, California, and then to the very young medical school at the time at University of California, Irvine. And I did very well through school. Undergraduate education at Caltech was extremely rigorous, but it really taught me the right way to think and the right way to look at science. So I was very well prepared for medical school, except the fact that in undergraduate, we took very more subjective exams. I didn't know how to take those A, B, C, D, and E, A, B type tests very well, but I learned to do that also. Got to medical school and I just knew, yes, for sure, this is what I really wanted. Made it through medical school and returned right to the community where I was raised in South Central to do my residency in family medicine. And that would be Martin Luther King Charles R. Drew Medical Center right there on 120th Street, Compton Avenue. I guess today a lot of people would say straight out of Compton. And that's where I met a lovely Trinidadian lady by the name of Noreen Johnson, who I admired as a consummate professional, well-groomed, well-mannered, and obviously from a wonderful home. Now, at first we were just professional associates, and we were both involved in other relationships when we met, but we worked very well together as a team. But later on, after about a year after meeting her, our respective relationships dissolved, and there was a meeting that occurred where we attended together. And at that meeting, something snapped, and we just started talking, and something in me connected with her, and the rest is history. And in July, it will be 40 years. So 4 decades.
Congratulations.
With Dr. Johnson. I always remind her, she's Dr. Johnson, but she will always be Mrs. Robinson.
So when you fell in love, you have this, getting together, and I've talked to your wife, Noreen, and she shares how, she was getting involved in, as an OB, she started getting involved in abortion practice. And she told me that she introduces you to it. Mm-hmm. So you're this kid who grew up dreaming to be a healer, like you said. Tell me how that happened.
Yeah. First, I like to say, and I didn't think about this until today. And as Noreen said, you're still learning more and more about abortion and killing babies each day. And here I am, approaching 70. The abortion procedure, or killing a baby, was the first bad thing in medicine I was ever taught. Everything I'd been taught up to this point was to benefit human beings. And now here's the first time I'm in a facility where we're healing people, giving, helping babies be born, taking care of babies in the nursery, and in comes this virus that says, oh, well, in this corner, we're going to kill some babies. Now, just to give you an idea of how schizophrenic this scenario is, we did deliveries on the 2nd floor of the hospital, labor and delivery. The most unbelievable procedure or process or experience you can have in medicine, I believe, is delivering another human being. It's just so awesome. And of course, you've had that wonderful experience. Farther down the hall, you have the nursery and also the intensive care unit, which, by the way, you have babies there that are probably less gestational age than ones you're killing in the hospital also. But no more than about 50 yards down the hall where you're delivering live babies is where we did abortions. It's a crazy schizophrenic, double-minded situation. But that illustrates how deceptive and how deceitful the true enemy is, and that's the devil, who can make you believe that what you're doing is right. And here I am with these esteemed physicians, attending faculty members, chief resident, everybody's doing it. And I think that's the beginning of that comfort zone or desensitization that we talk about. Well, if everybody else is doing it, it must be okay.
Did they have you do an abortion as part of your residency?
Yes. And
Talk me through what happened with that.
Well,
how did that happen?
in family medicine, you have to spend time on various services, OBGYN, family medicine, internal medicine. Well, while I was on OBGYN with my wife, one day you're going to be going to the abortion room to do abortion. So what do we do in medicine? Well, the first thing you do is you watch one.
So were you in residency then?
Yes, in residency. I didn't see an abortion in medical school because the hospitals that I trained in medical school did not perform abortions. Okay. Now, the first thing that happens when you see one, and again, you've got this environment of consent of people that you admire and people who are going to grade you, evaluate you. And the best way I can describe it is that I had a bit of cerebral queasiness, a little uneasy. I'm looking around to see if anybody else seems okay. Well, it must be okay. Then
what were you seeing?
Well, you have to, if you're going to be observing the abortion procedure, you kind of have to get behind and watch over the shoulder of the person who's performing it. So you're seeing how they grasped the cervix, the opening to the uterus, how they used instruments to dilate the cervix, and then how they used instruments to destroy the baby and suck the baby out of the uterus. And it's a very technical, not highly technical, not complicated, but it's just a straightforward thing. It's business, boom, boom, boom. Now, the first thing I actually learned, or concurrent with that, is how do you do the D&C itself, or dilation curettage. Many women have had that procedure, particularly those who have had a miscarriage, because you have to get that remaining tissue out so the woman doesn't bleed, doesn't get infection and that type of thing. But that exact same procedure can be done to destroy a normal pregnancy. So once you learn that D&C skill, you have a very marketable skill that you can now, do abortions in hospital or outside moonlighting in abortion facilities. And I try to stay away from the term that we all use, and I don't want to tell people how to speak or whatever, but I try to stay away from the term abortion clinic, because clinics are facilities where people go to be made better. No woman is made better by an abortion. I call them abortuaries, killing sinners, abortion facilities, but I will not give them the credibility to be called a clinic. In the same way, I think we've lost the meaning of what abortion really is. We say abortion, if we say abortion to 10 people, half of them are going to think we're talking about a political issue. But
well,
no,
you mentioned D&C, and I think that's a rationalization. People say, well, it's a procedure you use if you have a miscarriage, the baby's already passed. Why is it such a dramatic difference if I'm pregnant but it's unwanted? It's the same procedure. I think there's a rationalization around it, and you don't think about it in terms of a living, moving child.
Right. And you hit it on the head, because the baby, the most important variable in the equation, is totally ignored, dehumanized, and has no standing, even though in our founding documents for this country, we talk about we are endued with certain inalienable rights, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. No life, no liberty and pursuit of happiness, correct? So the baby doesn't get any protection, but we've got to remember, we're still short of 50 years of being a pro-death country. Prior to 1973, we were a pro-life country. Medicine was pro-life. And it wasn't until 1973 that doctors betrayed great public trust by becoming the executioners for Roe v. Wade.
You've mentioned before that you took the Hippocratic Oath as a physician, as physicians do in order to graduate medical school, and that you did, I think, swear, it used to include that you would not recommend or help a woman procure abortion because of the do no harm promise. When did that change?
Well, actually, they perverted the oath after 1973. They say an oath, but they basically say we're going to do things that are legal. Okay.
So they say they won't do abortions if they're not legal, is the difference.
Right. The original Hippocratic Oath is very clear. No abortions, no euthanasia, patient confidentiality, and no sexual relationships with patients. They perverted the oath so that they were no longer accountable to the original Hippocratic Oath. But you've also said another term that we lived by: first, do no harm. Okay? Now, no one can argue that an abortion does not harm a child. An abortion kills a child. It's as simple as that. And that's why when the Supreme Court ruled on this, when 9 men put on black robes and called themselves supreme, as our general counsel Matt Britton reminds us of, the 7 men that voted for that, and it's interesting that women don't mind those 7 men that legalized abortion, but they ushered us into an era where now we kill 3,000 babies a day, and we've killed about 60 million in this country since 1973. But this is a global thing. We're killing now about 60 million babies across our entire planet. It's an unprecedented loss of life. I would call it a pandemic holocaust of killing, and I refer to the virus as the Roe v. Wade 73 virus.
So when you were dating and getting to know, marrying ultimately your wife, you're still in residency. She shared that she actually introduces you. So you'd witnessed an abortion at this point as part of residency, that she was making side money in order to help, with residency, and through residency, once a week, she was doing abortions herself. And then she introduces you to this practice more. Talk to me about that. How did that happen? And then what was the time frame that you were doing abortions?
Yeah. Well, our first abortions were done in 1978, and I continued doing them for about 3 years or so. But it's interesting, when the enemy is working in your mind, he knows how to say, don't consider that, nothing to see here. So you wind up not even talking about what the abortions mean. You just talk about, well, we're going to do some abortions on Saturday. How many we got scheduled? Oh, we've got such and such scheduled. And in your mind, you're thinking, ching, 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 ching. You're just thinking about the money. You care nothing about these women because you don't even give them eye contact when you walk in the room. Do you enjoy doing it? No, I'm not going to say I ever enjoyed doing one abortion. But what you do, you get into this routine to where you can literally shut down your conscience, walk in a room with a woman that you don't know, who in reality does not want to kill her child, and in about 10 minutes, the baby is gone and you're walking out with your money. And that's a sad state of affairs. Yes, it is. It shows the depravity of a human being, how you can become desensitized, dehumanized. But if you think about it, somebody who smokes cigarettes, if they think about the first time they smoked a cigarette, their body cough, cough, cough. They thought it was horrible. But then before you know it, it's a pack a day. So what changed? The person accommodated to that toxic insult, and they accepted it as part of their life. And that's what I did. Accepted abortion, as well as since it's legal anyway, and since some women want it, but it's that strange dichotomy that on one hand you can be delivering a baby and essentially the same day walk down the hall with the same hand and kill a child. That is absolute depravity.
How many abortions do you think you did in those 3 years?
I would probably say several hundred, maybe around 200 to 300. fewer than my wife because she spent her entire residency on the OBGYN service while I only had sporadic parts on it. And back to that deception thing. Anyone that was alive in areas where Jesus was knew that he was who he said he was, in spite of that denial. But there was the centurion who was, I guess, coordinating the crucifixion of Christ. When Christ died, he fell on his knees talking about, surely this must have been the Son of God. Why did it take that last moment before he realized it, when Jesus had done all of these miracles, fed thousands of people, healed all kinds of people, raised people from the dead, and still that same centurion who knew about these things, his mind wasn't transformed until God opened his eyes that this, yes indeed, this beaten, mangled man on the cross is the Son of God.
There's this famous Jewish philosopher, you've probably heard of her, Hannah Arendt, and she coined this term, the banality of evil. She was talking about how during the Holocaust, how did the Nazis and many Germans just totally miss the humanity of their Jewish, really brothers and sisters who lived in their communities that they ended up treating so horrifically and ultimately killing millions of them. And she said it was this normalization where you just saw them as the other, and the evil became just completely normalized. And I know that's something that you talk about in just our medical system today. How do you think we got here? You said we were a pro-life country before 1973. What was that shift like? And in the medical profession, where all of a sudden it was do no harm, do no abortions, to now they're trying to get medical students across the board to witness or even take part in abortions.
Things like this, individually and collectively, happen incrementally. No, we didn't just one day have a Roe v. Wade decision out of a vacuum. No, the people who brought us abortion had been fighting for this, people like Margaret Sanger, etc., for decades upon decades. But when you have concurrently running with this ethical and moral decline, okay, which will bring about thinking less of your fellow human being, and what has happened with the body of Christ, with the weakening of the church in our country. There was a time where people in this country would not even think about not being a member of a church. Everyone was a member of a church. We had great revivals in this country, centuries ago. So it's a gradual thing, and I think once we got to the 60s with peace and free love and all that, and all you need to do is listen to the music lyrics. What is the message that you hear? And it goes along with how we get to the point to where a consequence of sexual activity, which is another human being, that's just a little something we just have to fix up, and we can get that out of the way for you, so you can go on being and doing what you were doing when you got pregnant, and that's where we are. So it's bit by bit, but thanks be to God, we're seeing the incremental shift. Now the pro-life movement, we were kind of late getting going, but we're coming back, and we are seeing a shift back in the other direction.
Do you remember doing your first abortion?
I can't clearly remember it. And when you ask that question, it kind of confirms me how you zone out to where it's just mechanical. This is not really personal. You really want an abortion? I'm a doctor. Hey, do the service. I'm moving on.
Was there ever a moment during that time when you were doing abortions that you mentioned earlier your conscience was pricked when you saw your first abortion, or you felt this discomfort even intellectually? Was there any moment when you were doing those few hundred abortions that you felt some discomfort, or you saw maybe this is a human life? Was there any moment like that?
Not significantly at all. I think when I witnessed later term abortions and saw, a fully formed baby that it had to be delivered kind of like with labor, kind of thought, fleeting thought though. I witnessed
And would those children be delivered alive or dead?
oh no, most be dead, yeah. At the time when I was trained, they used to do what was called a saline abortion, where they would take a large amount of very strong salt solution and inject it into the uterus, where you basically burn the baby up with salt. And then the baby is, over the next several hours, will be delivered. And it was kind of hard to watch that. There's another instance that I remember talking to one of the administrators of the abortion facility I was working in, that both of us are working in, where we kind of had a moment of reflection, and where we were talking about one lady wanted to know, even though it was an early term abortion, was it a boy or a girl? What do you tell them? You don't really know. And we talked about sometimes some of the bad situations you get in when the baby is farther along and you're thinking the amount of bleeding, and glad I got out of that one, but never anything of any depth or profundity at all, as far as getting to the point where you're going to acknowledge, wait a second, I take money for killing babies. Never get to that point.
Did you ever talk about it with your soon-to-be wife? I mean, I know you started dating and then ended up getting married in residency. Did you guys ever discuss this?
We never discussed
You
this,
did. So
except
she introduces you to the side gig of doing abortions. You're doing them together. You never talk about it?
We would just talk about the business of it, never about, well, I don't really want to do this, or,
Was there anyone in your life who thought it was controversial, or, questioned it at all? Your mother, or you said you were raised.
Never talked about it to my mother, even though
you were doing it.
Well, mothers have a way of knowing what's going on. I don't know at what point she knew, but we never really discussed it. And these questions really bring to light how you can walk through something so horrible, so horrific, so evil, as a couple that's doing abortions. And, you could look at the Bonnie of Clyde of abortionists, and you don't really even, I think even Bonnie and Clyde talked about, well, we were killing people. But no, we just talk about it like it's just a business. We'll get in here this morning, we're going to drive back home, and we're going to party tonight. And it's just a routine thing. And that's very sad. That's why I know now that I know the Lord, the Bible talks about we are renewed by the transformation of our mind. We have the mind of Christ. I had the mind of the enemy. That's even though I dress nice, look nice, talk nice, whatever, but I was an agent of the devil, killing babies who were being made in God's image. And it's nothing really personal for the devil. It's just that the devil at one time occupied a very nice place in heaven, and he saw the image of God. And when he got cast down to the earth, and it wasn't until he saw Adam and Eve that he saw the image of God again. And I'm sure it enraged him. So every time he sees a human being, even one that's one cell, he is enraged and wants to kill that child and take their life.
So 2 doctors, 4 kids, if I remember correctly, and you're about to celebrate how many years of marriage?
40 years. July 18.
4 decades.
That is a feat. Congratulations.
It's a blessing.
It's incredible. Mm-hmm. So you met and fell in love in residency. And tell me about the first time you saw each other. And did you think anything at that moment, like maybe we'll be married 40 years, almost 40 years from now, over 40 years from now?
No, he was a nice guy. Professional relationship. Never thought anything about it.
Yeah, I just thought she was a wonderful young lady. Loved that accent. It's nothing like a good West Indian accent. Loved hearing her talk. Loved the way she dressed, and her hair. And,
So he was crushing on you, it sounds like, but not.
Not really.
Just really no. This is good, clean admiration.
Okay,
I would
got
say
it.
that
Got
at least for the first year that I knew her, and then we fell in love.
And then when you're getting married in residency, and did you plan on starting a family soon, or were you just, what tell me what went into that decision to get married?
When we got married right after residency, 18 days after residency, we were married. And what can I say? At first, I wanted the traditional type of family and have
No,
children.
no.
Yeah, but
no.
she had a different.
Yeah, I told him I didn't want any children. And I mean, I was pretty serious about that because I saw my life as a professional, career-oriented woman. Now remember, I was doing abortions and, OBGYN lifestyle, doing abortions. I really didn't see room in my life for children. And, and I think probably at the back of my mind, maybe it was something spiritual telling me, you killing all these babies, probably your punishment is you wouldn't have children. Maybe it was something at the back of my mind telling me that I wouldn't have any children. And I was kind of preemptive in saying I didn't want any children. But God had a laugh in store for us because we got pregnant on the honeymoon.
Wow.
Didn't waste any time.
Yeah, unexpectedly.
And totally off cycle.
Yeah.
So it was God's plan.
So then what happened? I mean, you said you didn't want to have kids.
So, So we actually had planned the wedding around my menstrual cycle, which was so regular. And, I hadn't been using any birth control because my cycles were so regular and we were using, natural family planning technique. And there's no way I should have become pregnant.
When you became pregnant, did you consider, I mean, you were doing abortions at the time, you didn't want to be a mom.
Right, yes. So when I became pregnant, the first thing I thought was, well, there's no way we could have this baby. So, of course, I told Haywood, I was pregnant. And so I said, well, we just get an abortion. And I said, well, I'll ask my friend Steve. Steve and I did abortions. Steve was my fellow resident and one of my best friends who lived down the hall from us at the same apartment. And my fellow resident, best friend. And I said, he was real good at abortions. And I said, well, let's just ask Steve. I could trust him with the secret. And so we asked Steve to perform the abortion. And Steve's wife was one of my bridesmaids in the wedding. And I asked Steve, and Steve looked at me as if I were crazy. And he said, Noreen, you asking me to do an abortion on your baby? He said, you and Haywood just got married. He said, you all love each other and you asking me to do an abortion? He said, I'd never do an abortion on you. It took me by surprise. And I said, well, Steve, if you won't do my abortion, there's nobody else I can trust to do it.
So that made the decision for you.
That made the decision.
What did you think about this? Did you know that she was asking Steve to do the abortion?
Yes, and I have maybe a slightly different memory of the account of that. I was the more or less passive guy. I wanted to have kids, but I knew when you're dealing with a strong-willed professional woman, the more I would push, probably get more pushback. So what I was relying on, well, once we get married and it's the right time, well, of course we're going to have children. Now, when she asked And she said, we asked, but as I remember, she asked Steve to do this, and we'll just use that as the name. And you heard the answer, but I don't think, and I would like to think, that I would not have allowed her, if he would have said, oh, no problem, I'll do it, I would like to think I would have stepped in at that time and said, no, we can't do that. That's what I would like to think.
Did you feel afraid when you knew she was talking to Steve and asking about having one?
I think in my heart, and I don't know if this was just maybe God speaking to my heart, I felt that we were going to be okay. And I thought that, time would be on our side, and it probably isn't something that's not going to work out. And thankfully, it worked out the way that it did. But retrospectively, when we look back at what, our wonderful neighbor said, no, there's no way you could do it. We look back on that and we can say, why couldn't we see any of the other babies that we've been involved with killing? How come we couldn't see it? And it was only through, I guess, the paradigm of her being friends with him that you could see it. But it goes back to when you love someone or care about them, you're not going to harm them. It's as simple as that.
So Noreen, when you, Dr. Johnson, when you had this conversation with your friend Steve and you end up having your daughter and giving birth to her, did that, during this time you were still doing abortions, did that affect in any way your mentality while you were doing abortions, the fact that you're carrying your own daughter and ultimately delivering her?
No, it didn't. And and it's interesting that we're going to hook up with JC today. Isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm. But we're going to be meeting, and she's driving down from Yuba City today to meet with us, and her name is going to come up from time and time again, and it's just God ordained. But it didn't strike me, the significance of this eye contact and rehumanization, and the fact that the baby is so dehumanized in the whole process of this abortion thing, and the impact of that eye contact, and the Steve issue, until we met J.C. Carpenter, who's going to drive down from Yuba City, and the Lord had her call me this morning. And this is how God works.
That's amazing.
This is how God works. I met JC 2 years ago at a 40 Days for Life symposium. And I just walked into her in the lobby and attracted to her. And we started talking, and she gave me her testimony and all that. And I happened to tell her my testimony about Steve and how I almost aborted Udell, our daughter. And she said to me, what made you not do it? And I told her my friend Steve refused. And she said, wow, you asked him to do your abortion? And he said no? She said, wow, he loved you. He wouldn't do your abortion. And that hit me. That was another piece of the unfolding of this mystery of abortion. If somebody loves you, they can't hurt you. They can't do your abortion. She said, Steve loved you. He couldn't do your abortion. That's why that eye contact thing is so important. J.C. Carpenter, J.C. stands for Jesus Christ. J.C., if you look into somebody's eyes, you look into the eyes of J.C., Jesus Christ. That's the rehumanization. When you look into that woman's eyes, you see love. You see Jesus Christ. You see the eyes of Jesus. You see humanity. You see the baby. You see a suffering woman. You see her pain and suffering. You reconnected with the humanity. You love the woman. You love her baby. Jesus brings it all into perspective. The love of Jesus. He heals it all. He puts things in perspective. He can heal the doctor. He rehumanizes, and that's why I tell you, it's still unfolding.
When did it start unfolding? Because you were newlyweds, having your first child. You are doing abortions together. You end up moving to Texas. You're doing some abortions in Texas. But then you told me earlier that your husband had this dramatic conversion and it sparked something in you. Tell me about that.
Well, that is my Damascus road. Not quite as dramatic as the Apostle Paul or Saul becoming Paul. But here you have an individual, as he said, a Pharisee among Pharisees from the tribe of Benjamin. And he had it going on, killing and imprisoning Christians. And he thought he was doing the right thing. And one day on Damascus Road, he had an encounter with Jesus Christ. And he was never, ever the same. And he becomes the greatest missionary in history after he was a seasoned citizen, after he was 65 years old. It illustrates how an encounter with Jesus is transforming. It's a 180-degree change. And we all have to remember as believers, the conversion door only swings one way, and that's from darkness to light. You don't have testimony that goes the other direction. That's what makes you know that it's God and his eternal process of making you more like Christ. Well, I went to this on March the 2nd, 1985, right? Or is that 1986?
86.
I go to this Christian music concert that Leon Patel is performing. And that's 3 weeks before the delivery of our youngest child that we had together. And Noreen, being 37 weeks pregnant, she doesn't want to go to this concert. I take my mother. Halfway through the concert, Leon Patillo says, anyone who wants things to be 100% right with God to stand up, without me even thinking. I know it was the Holy Spirit. Now, yanks me up out of my seat, and he prays something like a sinner's prayer, whatever, because I wasn't raised in a church that had taught me what the gospel is and our salvation. I didn't know what had happened. But when I left that concert and I got home to Noreen after dropping my mother off at home, I knew something had happened. I seemed lighter, things even physically looked different, felt different. Now, what happens next is interesting because right now I'm about probably a 30-minute drive from my roommate in medical school. He was coming to that delivery of the baby that we're getting ready to have. And guess what the good doctor, Calvin Wheeler, is? He's the son of a Pentecostal preacher. So when I started sharing with him my experience at the concert and how I felt spiritually transformed, he starts crying. And it's because he and his wife were praying that we come to Christ. Once you come to Christ and your mind finally gets flipped, rebooted, you see things from a totally different point of view. And we knew, as Noreen said, the Lord powerfully committed us or convicted us of our past with abortion. And we finally could feel at least the beginning of the depth and the horror of what we have perpetrated on humanity. But it's a long healing process that's still going on. Yes, I'm a believer. Yes, I know I have eternal life in Christ, but you're still dealing with the damage of the work that you did. And today, here we are, 30-some years into our pro-life work. Blessed to be here with you today, moving along, continuing to move along that continuum of becoming more like Christ. And the Lord is using the pro-life movement as our major vehicle to do that.
I'm using your story. I mean, how incredible for so many people, whether they're pro-choice or they're not sure what they think, to hear. What did you think when your husband is having this dramatic conversion and he's now saying he's I don't know what you said exactly, but he's...
He didn't have to say anything. I saw a transformed man come home from that concert. And it really awakened something in me, because he came home and he started waking up early in the morning, going to church. We didn't have any Bible visible in the house. He went out, bought a Bible, and started going to Bible study, 6:30 or so in the morning. By then, the baby was born. As soon as the baby was old enough that we could take the baby to church, we took her to church. The first time we took the baby to church, the spirit of conviction fell upon me. And I know, I grabbed his hand and I said, Haywood, let's go up to the altar and confess to the Lord our past involvement with abortion. And we walked up to the altar weeping to pray to the Lord, asking forgiveness for our involvement with in abortion. That was the first thing that that we got convicted about, the sin of abortion.
And it's a blessing that that was the method. Some people say, well, did you get convinced by reading this book, or did someone have give you the basic laws of these spiritual laws or whatever? But you see, if you just accept that abortion is bad or whatever sin is bad, simply just based on some academic exercise and without some spiritual transformation, all I would have been would be a former abortionist who's still going to hell, right? I'd just be a pro-life going to hell doctor. So the first thing the only thing that can really happen that changes you from the depth of your heart, from the inside out, is the experience of becoming a follower of Jesus Christ. So you look at children from Jesus Christ's point of view. And the Bible is very clear how much Jesus loves children. It's ready. He rebuked his own disciples for stopping children that just want to be close to him and allowing Christ to bless him. So I'm just thankful. Now, of course, abortion was not the only sin I'd ever been involved in my life. Long before I did my first abortion, I was on my way to hell. So, but it's just that God used that as the focal point to move out and for us to go into a good faith walk with Christ, but also using pro-life work is our...
Tell me about that. So you're getting into pro-life work now after this conversion. What did that look like? And then how did you end up helping lead 40 Days for Life, and you're assisting and doing so much incredible advocacy now?
Well, it's been a beautiful walk. The first ministry I was involved in pro-life work was our local pregnancy resource center. It was small at the time. We had a budget of like $1,100 a month. And now they have a budget probably about $300,000, maybe close to $400,000 a year. And pregnancy resource centers far outnumber abortion facilities now. Noreen and I have been involved in a host of organizations, and we've traveled the planet on behalf of preborn babies. We were involved in founding Life Education and Resource Network, LEARN, which Johnny Hunter is the leader, the Reverend Dr. Johnny Hunter, of whom I'll be on a board meeting on a Zoom today. It's been a beautiful walk, but where I am right now, I'm on staff with 40 Days for Life, and you're familiar with that organization. As people ask, how are you living now? How are you enjoying life? I tell them I'm living the dream. And for us to see that God's simple model of prayer and fasting and standing in front of an abortion facility saves babies, gets abortion workers out of those facilities, and then also closes those facilities. And the most famous one that I think that most people know about is Abby Johnson, who came right out of where we had the very first 40 Days for Life prayer vigil, and I was right there. It's just an awesome thing to see. Only God can do things like what happened with Abby Johnson. And the last, just icing on the cake, not only did 40 Days for Life and our local pregnancy resource center move into that building where 6,400 babies were killed, but the Pregnancy Resource Center and 40 Days for Life purchased that building, and that is now the global headquarters for 40 Days for Life. And that's not all. Guess what? There were 2 doctors who needed to move their office to a new facility. So the last 3 to 4 years of our practice, Noreen and I practiced in the now closed Planned Parenthood building right alongside 40 Days. So it's a God story on how he takes you from working in a building, a Planned Parenthood facility, getting saved, being involved with ministry that shuts it down, and then you move in and minister. It's just kind of like God told Israel, when they were going into the promised land, I'll give you houses that you have not built, vineyards that you have not planted. And it's not you. It's not something I worked out. It's nothing but a God story of how Jesus transforms a life.
It's incredible.
Or lives.
Many lives, and all the lives that have been touched because of your work and the work of 40 Days for Life. Could you share some of those numbers with us? Because I think they're so inspiring. I mean, obviously your work leading 40 Days for Life is part of the reason for this, but the clinics that have closed, the lives that have been saved.
Mm-hmm. Well, first, we're going from one prayer vigil to now close to 700, and we're all around the planet.
It's amazing.
That's unbelievable growth. We have saved almost 20,000 babies that have been saved simply by that we know of, right? We've had hundreds of facility workers who have left, over 200 have left those killing centers, and more than 100 facilities have closed, and those numbers are continuing to go up. So we have 2 40-day campaigns every year, one during the spring, one during the fall, and I'm looking forward to that one coming up.
I'll be joining with you.
All right.
Thank you for sharing your stories and your story and being a witness, I think, to so many others of the power of God's love and the power of life and saving lives.
May you continue to prosper you and your ministry too, Lila.
Absolutely.
Amen. To God be the glory.
This has been a blessing to be here with you.
Blessings.